Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. Options, written by Infernalism. It honestly didn't look like much from orbit. White, cracked, smaller than the moon, and compared to its parent planet, Europa, came across as almost an afterthought. In 2090, United Earth finally established a base on Europa, the first of its kind, the EU station Providence. At the time, it was the singular most exciting thing in science and exploration. We already spread to several other worlds, having discovered the sidestep process that opened the galaxy to us and colonization. The idea of exploring Europa almost seemed quaint by that point, as we discovered 3 other spacefaring societies within the first decade of sidestepping across the closest stars. Nevertheless, the idea of discovering life so close to Earth still had a lot of appeal to the EU scientific community. But since it wasn't an official priority, the scientific community was merely given the permission to do so as they wished, as the primary goal of the EU was to find habitable worlds that were empty and immediately available for colonization. And, to be completely fair, the scientific community preferred that. With the opening of the galaxy via sidestepping, the surreal feeling of euphoric excitement had swept through humanity, with all of the sciences and disciplines suddenly exploding with new discoveries. They were already, unironically, calling it the Second Renaissance. Europa, however, and slightly amusingly, never turned into anything of interest, much to the distress of that scientific community that spent so much time and effort establishing a base there. They found life, yes, but simple life that flourished in deep liquid ocean that lay beneath the ice crust. It took them 20 years to fully establish Providence, and all that came of it was an out-of-the-way spot for oceanographers to test their theories and for engineers to explore true deep-sea submersibles. Granted, they had yet to find a world that required such things, as habitable, so-called garden worlds were plentiful in the wider galaxy. So Providence was mostly associated with disappointment and a cautionary tale regarding getting ahead of oneself in the scientific world. To date, Providence is manned by a few hundred scientists, mostly oceanographers, engineers, technicians, students of those different fields, and, lastly, a slow but steady stream of civilians that came here to see the eye. You see, Providence is unique in its design. It's built into the ice crust of Europa, with a solid metal dome covering the surface structure. But it's the other half of Providence that draws in the tourists. And on the other side of the crust, an identical dome sits affixed to the underside of the icy crust made of a transparent metal alloy. With 2 halves connected via mile-thick anchoring columns, the transportation tubes, the underneath as it's called, hangs down from the ice crust, the majority of which are sensors, cameras, all manner of scientific study devices, all aimed down into the European ocean below. It was a wonder at the time of its creation back in 2090, but the UE has long surpassed it in engineering feats. Today, there are 5 different worlds that hold human populations over 1 billion people, and all of them qualify as paradises. New discoveries are trumpeted every day. It seems, with brilliant engineers working on marvels like Dyson tubes, world-spanning shipyards, communicating across the galaxy via quantum communication networks. So, why in the hell am I here on a tourist ship, making my final approach to Providence Station? To be honest, I'm not entirely sure as yet, but I will find out. I can tell you, though, it's not for leisure. That said, the drinks weren't terribly bad. The sign overhead beeped, finally indicating final approach, and while I knew already about how the approach would be done, it didn't stop me from grasping tighter to the chair arms as the metal roof of the tourist ship hummed lightly and suddenly faded into transparency. Jupiter's brilliance was immediate, and while I'd seen it before, the great vast world still awed me, and the cabin was filled with gasps and cries and remarks of 24 other passengers, all tourists, who may well be seeing it for the first time. Their first reaction That instinctive fixation on the vast stretch of Jupiter overhead helped distract from the sudden swelling of Europa's ice crust, rushing up at us as the ship dived down, nose first, at the white expanse. There was a scream or three as we plummeted, and I would say that the pilots did it on purpose, but the craft had been on autopilot since arriving in the European orbit. We fell out of the sky and, seemingly at the last second, the ship veered towards a jagged black line that split the white crust and fell deep into the moon's crust. The screams continued for a minute and, overhead, an inhumanly friendly and calm voice explained how the gravity of Jupiter pulled on the Europa's crust as it orbited, causing an icy tectonic activity, opening up fissures that went all the way down through the crust itself. We fell into that darkness, only with interior lights illuminating that dark, so we couldn't see the craggy ice cliffs on either side. We couldn't see anything at all until we were swallowed up by violet-white plume of water exploding upwards from below, from that deep ocean that lay beneath, the roar of which was felt even through the transparent shell designed to protect against direct impacts with asteroids and orbital impact. They tell me that Europa has a slightly atmosphere, mostly made of oxygen, but you never have known it from that descent, from vacuum to submerged in a warm ocean. Well, relatively speaking, the water itself hovers near the freezing temperature near the crust, I'm told, but compared to the vacuum of space, it's a warm and comforting blanket. More lights come on as we descend and finally enter the European ocean proper, leveling out and turning towards the underneath of the eye of Europa, that being the vast dome itself. Here again, I can see how Providence has become so popular an attraction for tourists and travelers. The dome itself is clear and the whole of the thing is lit up from within. Great vast structures reach down from the crust above within the dome, like daggers or teeth, nothing touching the dome itself, and 1,000 spotlights reach down from the dome into the water below, highlighting the quick-moving figures of alien fish, quicksilver in the darkness, with the spotlights highlighting them and then gone, going deep again to avoid the light, which they undoubtedly saw as a sign of danger. A brilliant sight to see, even for someone like myself who'd seen a thing or two in the last 20 years. Unfortunately, that sight faded away as the ship took us into the docking tunnel, the ship's shell going opaque again, as the sight of the ice tunnels wasn't exactly exciting for anyone. Once we exited, we could have been on Earth or Haven or any other human-controlled worlds. The port was smaller than most, though, and even then, we were the only ship that had docked. Empty stalls and stations, they echoed with our steps and the loud tourists that surrounded me, with a tour guide going on about Europa and the port itself, built into the highest layer of the underneath. The guards ahead and behind were slightly curious, though. The ones behind stopped with me when I bent down to retie my laces. I couldn't tell if they were upset or just surprised when I stood back up with a badge in hand. "Jack Lane, I am with United Earth, Department of the Interior. I need to see your boss, now."
"Mr. Lane, it is a pleasure."
By the way he shook my hand, you'd think I'd come to take his job away, which, incidentally, was something entirely possible if I were truly from the interior, which I wasn't, but he didn't need to know that. Director Phillips was a tallish man, heavier than I expected too. Europa's gravity was next to nothing, and even with artificial gravity, there was always a slimming effect on those who spent their time outside an Earth-similar gravity. Normally, I used that to my advantage, so it was a bit surprising to see such a physicality in a man who'd spent the last 30 years or so on a moon with barely more than 1/10 of Earth's gravity. The guards had been quick to take me to the director, a side door taking me away from the gaggle of tourists and into the world behind the tourist system. A horizontal elevator, then a descending elevator, and then I was left behind in a smallish room where the director found me a few minutes later.
"Come in, please."
The man was nervous about being in the unscheduled meeting with a member of the department that could fire him, or confiscate the entirety of the station itself. He didn't show it. I kinda liked that, to be honest. That said, I still had a job to do. Director Phillips.
Henry, please.
It's best to stay formal, Director. For the moment, at least. Again, no sign of stress. No flop sweat. No obvious anxiety.
If you say so, Mr. Lane.
He moved back in with me and moved over to take a seat at his desk. He had a vast window set into the wall behind him, looking out over the dome behind and beneath him. A great view of nothing, really. In 30 years, I don't think that we've ever had an interior agent visit us. I hope there's no issue. Well, that depends on a few things, Director. A few clicks on the PDA, and Director, your station here has had a static population of rotating professionals for the last 25 years. 5 years ago, however, a discrepancy was noted and filed. You had 35 men rotate in and supposedly 35 men rotate out. However, those 35 men are currently unaccounted for.
You have access to our records. I'm sure you can see how we filed their departure data appropriately.
Yes, Director. We do have that. That said, those men are still unaccounted for.
It's a big galaxy, Mr. Lane. We did our part. That said, it seems very strange that they'd all disappear. Amazingly strange. Are you sure there is not a data mix-up somewhere?
Are you sure they actually left?
He paused, then he continued. Why would we bother lying about that?
Indeed. Why would you?
You're free to search the facilities, if you like.
Funny. One guy searching a base this size. Director, I'll let you know if that's necessary. Let's move on.
As you wish.
There was something about him that bothered me, and it wasn't his flippant attitude. He seemed off. Now, you need to understand. I've seen aliens, real, honest-to-God aliens, and most of them didn't bother me in the slightest. They were different looking and sounding, but just different. This guy was offsetting somehow. Something. I returned to the PDA. 3 years ago, you reached out to the linguistics department at no less than 6 different universities on Earth, requesting details on a certain ancient languages, in specific Polynesian and other South Pacific languages.
Is that a problem?
We're more interested in learning why.
Just a personal interest. It's nothing related to our work here.
Uh-huh. Speaking of your work here, 2 years ago, you requested a mining team that arrived and has not yet been rotated out again.
That is correct. They're expanding the tunnels in the upper dome area.
I see. I wasn't aware that we needed more space here on Providence.
Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, Mr. Lane. These are minor issues, at best.
Director, what are you hiding? United Earth was a big bureaucracy, but once something is noticed, it is not something that is ignored. And with Providence being so close to Earth. He sat there, silent, across from me, just watching for a long minute before seemingly nodding to himself.
Very well, Mr. Lane. I'd hoped to keep this under wraps for a bit longer, but it seems as if the UE won't let me.
He stood again, sounding somewhat relieved, strangely enough, excited.
Come with me.
I felt better now that the director had finally owned up to something being wrong here. Perhaps he had indulged himself in some unauthorized work that would explain the missing men, the mining teams, and the linguistics requests. What kind of work? I had no idea. But I waited to see first. More elevators again, and my somewhat directed question was evaded by admonishments that he'd rather show me than tell me. Down we went. I realized at the last that he was taking us to the very tip of the lowest structure, closest to the dome itself. We exited out in a room that had a transparent floor, as if we hovered there above the alien ocean, with a large pointed device pointing down at the floor end, presumably through the floor and into the ocean itself.
Do you know why Providence was built here?
The ice crust was thinnest here.
Very good. Incidentally, it is also where the ocean happened to be the deepest. It's nearly 100 miles deep. That's nearly 15 times as deep as the deepest spot on Earth.
Director, we found something.
But this,
gesturing to the pointed system at the center of the room, you're going to have to be more specific.
Ruins.
I shook my head. Impossible. If you said you'd found ruins on the surface, I might have bought it. But even if you managed to find a way to map the bottom of Europa's ocean, there is no way anything could be there. Certainly not ruins.
Now it was Head's turn to look amused. Why not?
You said it yourself. It's nearly 100 miles down. That water pressure alone would make any sort of civilization impossible.
Nevertheless, it's there.
Jesus. Director, if you're doing this to drum up more tourism...
This is an echolocation-based system. Like you said, we were looking to map the floor. Instead, the system penetrated a silt and found a structure there. More to the point, we realized that the echo pulse was having a physical impact.
The amount of power needed for that would be immense.
Hence, the need for new tunnels or new power facilities.
There is no indication in our reports that you've built a new power facility.
Yes, your interior missed it.
Yes, he sounded distinctly amused, almost arrogant.
In any case, we've spent the last few years using the system here to clear out the silt, with repeated blasts from the echolocator.
Those blasts would decimate any ruins below.
You'd think so, Mr. Lane. In fact, they show no signs of any damage at all, of any kind.
So you kept these missing men here to run your systems quietly, while covertly building new additions to your station and, you admitted, doing so with the intent to defraud the interior. I think it's time we talked about bringing in some auditing teams and determining where we go from here, Director.
Have you heard nothing I've said, Mr. Lane?
Oh, I've heard. You're either off your fucking rocker, or you're lying out your ass. Either way, Director, the Interior isn't interested in funding your personal diversions any longer. Either you resign today, now, or we go back to Earth with you in a set of cuffs. Those are your options.
Do I have to decide now?
His arrogance was starting to irritate me, but there was something else there. Something that, if I were being honest, I'd say was scaring me. I hoped he couldn't see it, but the smile he had.
Before I decide, I want to show you one thing. Fair enough?
I should have said no, but... Fine! He called out to his associate, calling out for him to put an image up on display. That image? Yes, that image. One of the wall screens lit up and a fuzzy image came to view. One that sharpened.
The echolocator bounced back an image. We had it in its greatest possible strength at the time, and it penetrated right through the muck. Bounced off a slab, I think, and bounced us back to us.
Sharp, detailed now. Not a bit of degradation. No chips marred its surface. No erosion from the ceaseless ocean. No cracks. No breaks. Just lines of text, images, figures. Maybe I was jet-lagged from the trip, but I had a hell of a headache building suddenly. I found myself fixated on one word there, if you could call it a word. It could have been gibberish, but I kept coming back to it, looking at it, trying to read it, trying to say it. I got closer and closer, squinting and focusing. The director, he just laughed at me as I stood there, inches from the wall, so focused on that word.
Really, it's not your fault, Mr. Lane. It's an old word. A name, in fact. It's pronounced Releha.
End of story. I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barky, Lord Azrakal, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Dragzoon WRE, Holly's Sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.